What's up, lifting aficionados? So I did a poll the other day. That sounds dirty. Okay, I conducted a poll the other day on how often you significantly change your training. And the results were pretty interesting. 4% of people said every day is a surprise. 3% of people said every week is new or different. 10% said about every month. 43% said every 8 to 12 weeks. And 40% said almost never. So in this video, we're going to go over how often you should change your training. First, what are your goals?
Boring.
You would be surprised how many people cannot really answer this question. Make them specific, make them measurable, and make them realistic. So getting in shape, doing fitness, those are not very good goals. Make them specific. So gaining muscle is not particularly specific. Gaining a quarter of an inch on your arms, more specific, more measurable. So strength, size, endurance, fat loss, cardiovascular performance, blood markers, lipids, hemoglobin A1C, make it specific and measurable. And measure it as often as you can. Next, you have your training split or the frequency that you are working a specific area or a specific movement, or just how frequently you're going to the gym. You don't necessarily need to change this very often, and certainly it should not be on a week-to-week basis, and probably not on a monthly basis either. If every week is cycling from full body to push-pull legs to upper-lower, to a bro split, to some other weird split, to a gentleman split, and you're just rotating through and every week is different, that is absolutely not going to be optimal for progress. You want to have some consistency week to week so you can actually measure if you're progressing. You want to view your training as an experiment.
Yes, you say trial and error, eh? My good man, that is nothing more than the scientific method.
The training split is the skeleton on which the whole training is sort of resting upon. And for it to be an experiment, there have to be two things. First, you have to give time for the experiment to actually show results, or potentially to not show results. But either way, this is not a week-long thing. This is going to take at least a few months in most cases. Second, you do occasionally have to change things. If you're doing everything exactly the same every single training cycle, you're not really learning and you will plateau eventually. I absolutely guarantee that. Next, rep range and or percentage of 1 rep max. If you think about it, these things are sort of inversely correlated. The heavier you're going, the lower the reps and vice versa. I would say if your goal is hypertrophy, you don't need a ton of variation here. You might want to occasionally switch things up a little bit, but it's by no means required. Just because you're doing 8 to 12 reps, that doesn't mean you need to change that to do 12 to 15 or 5 to 8 later. You can gain muscle at a huge variety of rep ranges, and you don't really necessarily need to change that. On the other hand, if you have strength goals, it might make sense to go from slightly higher reps, more volume, a base phase, more variation, and then as you go towards a peak, if you're signed up for meet or you just want to peak your strength, you go towards less variation, lower reps, less volume, and you freshen up, and so you can display all that strength that you built in that base phase. Alexander Bromley advocates this approach, and I think it can work really, really well. You just have to set it up intelligently. Now, in terms of exercise selection, you don't necessarily need to vary things all that much. Find the few exercises that work really, really well for you, whether that's accessories to build your strength or just lifts that build up a certain area that you want to hypertrophize. You don't need to change those all that often. Once you find those handful of movements, you can stick with them pretty much for life. Now, that being said, it's a handful of movements. Unless you have weirdly small hands, a handful means a few different movements that you can rotate through in various training cycles. It's not just one movement that is the ultimate lat movement or the ultimate chest movement or the ultimate quad movement.
It's quite cool. What can you see? Can you see anything?
Nothing. There's nothing. Wait. There were markings. some form of...
Bullshit.
I can't read it.
There are few who can. The language is that of
Influencers.
which I will not utter here.
You are going to want a few, and you're going to want to find a few, and that few is going to be different for every single person. And this is one of the main reasons to occasionally try new movements. I've been training for 7 years, and I still occasionally try a new movement because it could be better than what I'm currently doing. Not highly likely, but it could happen, and I still find movements that I really, really like. So I think experimenting with a little bit of your training program, occasionally swapping in a new movement, can be very, very beneficial, even if you are advanced. That being said, you can't alter everything at once because then you've ruined the experiment and you don't know what is actually working. Could be this, could be that, could be the combination, could be everything, could be nothing. You just don't know what is actually working. Plus, if you're constantly swapping the movements, yes, you'll get sore more easily, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's actually working. It just means that it's new. And just because something is new doesn't mean it's good. Don't go just based on your feelings, go based on the long-term results, which isn't always easy to do, especially if you're a beginner. Because as you learn a new movement, you're not actually building muscle. You're just adapting neurologically. And so if you're constantly cycling between a dozen different movements, you might think you're making progress when you're actually going nowhere. And that's especially true of compound movements. Isolation movements are less neurologically demanding. It's less about learning the movement and more just about working the muscle. Therefore, if you swap in and out curl variations, not the end of the world. But if you swap in and out squat variations and deadlift variations and you're always cycling through a bunch of them, not good. Now, if you're a beginner, I would say stick to just a few basic movements, learn those well, and do not program hop. That is a very good way to go nowhere. If you're more advanced, there's sort of two sides to this coin. The first is that you probably want extreme specificity, especially if your goal is strength. If you look at the Bulgarian system in weightlifting, which can be highly effective, it was a very, very narrow focus in terms of exercise specificity. They only did a few exercises and they just did a lot of them. And there's no doubt that this can drive a high level of performance. But it can also be a little bit on the risky side, especially if you're only doing 1 rep maxes, you're just doing a few exercises, you're not varying anything at all, and you're doing a high frequency of these movements. Bulgarian can work if you survive it. So on that other side of the coin, if you're more advanced, you might need more variation just to stay in one piece. If you're moving heavier loads, you need more recovery, especially at a local level. Next, RIR, RPE, how close you're going to failure. One thing that I don't like is when you have a mesocycle, across 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and you start very, very, very easy, and then you end very, very, very difficult. I don't think this is optimal because you want a more even spread of stress, in my opinion and in my experience. So 5, 6, 7, 8 reps in reserve. For hypertrophy, not going to be doing a whole lot. For strength, it's pretty good. We'll get to that in a second. But for hypertrophy, probably not a good idea. You're better off doing like 2 to 3 reps in reserve and then slowly getting closer to failure. You might even be able to train at the same proximity to failure all of the time. That's what I do, and it works pretty well. Now, when it comes to strength training, fatigue management is very much more of a thing. You might have some kind of undulating stress to your training program, some kind of wave loading. It's going to be more periodized, and it's going to be more focused on the performance rather than just having a consistent level of effort. Now, when it comes to volume, the Russian system is like going way up in volume, spurring adaptations, then going way down and recovering, and you have a very sort of cyclical type of approach, week to week or month to month. I think if you're just a normal average hypertrophy enthusiast, this is less important, and you can have a very consistent amount of volume. I do think when you're starting a mesocycle, you might want to start on the lower side of volume and then scale up a little bit. But if you're going from like 1 set to 10 sets across a mesocycle, I don't think that is really optimal. You might go from like 3 to 5, something like that. Plus, I do think there is an auto-regulation component to this, and I usually write a range of sets for at least some movements, And on good days, you do a little bit more. On days where you don't feel as fresh, you do a little bit less. And I think that's a good way to set things up. And I think something important is asking yourself, are you still making progress? If the answer is no, and it's been a few weeks, well, then it makes sense to try to change things up. Analyze, are you doing too much? Are you not doing enough? I have a flow chart in my book where you can ask yourself and try to assess how things are going. But yes, if you're not making progress, something's wrong, especially if it's been a few weeks. If it's been 1 week, maybe keep going and see, okay, maybe it was just a bad week. But if it's been multiple weeks and you're not making progress, that's when it's time to make a change. If you are still making progress, well, don't even watch this video. Go away. Go to the gym and keep making progress. And I get people who message me and they say like, oh, I've been doing this and this is in my training, like, what should I do? And I say like, oh, well, how have you been progressing? They're like, oh yeah, I've been doing really well. What's the problem? Also, periodically assess your level of enjoyment and interest and motivation in the training process. If you're making progress, but your motivation is absolutely in the gutter, especially if you're not a professional athlete, why? Why kill yourself to do something you don't want to do in the first place when you train for enjoyment, at least in theory? Also, just how do you feel? How is your sleep? Are you beaten up? Do your joints feel fine? And if your squat is going up, but your knees are really, really complaining, you might want to make a proactive change. This could be volume, this could be technique, this could be exercise selection. Maybe you need to deload, lots of stuff that you could change. And you have to find for yourself what changes are the best to make for you. Keep in mind you have a limited amount of adaptation energy that you can use to improve yourself, whether that's strength or size or endurance or anything else. You cannot do everything and ride in all directions at once. Put your ass on one horse and ride to your goals. And you have to find your formula. And this is going to require, sort of by definition, at least some experimentation. You can't just get, a cookie cutter plan online, use it and use it forever. You're going to have to change your training at least a little bit, and you have to be involved mentally in the process, not just physically. If you're not mentally involved in the process, you are essentially just going through the motions. And even if you're advanced, you still have to be involved in the process. Once you find a pretty good formula, I can guarantee that it can be better. You look at someone like Dan Green, very, very high level powerlifter. He's been doing this forever, basically. And he's still making small changes to his program. He's still trying out new accessory movements. He's working around issues that he has, and training is an evolving process. So when I see 40% of people almost never changing their training, I guess the word significantly can throw that off, but you should absolutely still be experimenting at least a little bit. Not so much that you ruin the experiment, but enough that it's actually an experiment. And for these 7% of people who changed up their training every single day or every single week, I would say that's not inherently wrong or bad or evil or anything like that. It just might be suboptimal to get to some specific goals, especially if those goals are fairly high.
You cannot pass!
All you have to do is give your energy, money, to me first.
I just want some motherfucking gains, bro.
You don't see high-level athletes go in and just do whatever they want. There's some kind of structure in place. But if you don't have those goals, there's nothing wrong with just going to the gym and essentially just having fun. For a lot more on exercise technique, exercise selection, programming, making changes to your training plan, all that good stuff, definitely grab a copy of my book. It is still only $15 Runos, which is pretty ridiculous for how much information is there, but that is my gift to you. All right, that is all for this video. Like, subscribe, share, notifications on, slap around the bell thingy, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.